I'm going to introduce Rachel Cooper. Rachel is the distinguished, it says, Professor of Design Management and Policy at Lancaster University. She tells me you only get that because they don't want to pay you any more money. You get an extra word in your title, she just told me. She's Director of Imagination Lancaster, which you'll know is a design-led research centre, and she's been involved in a number of HRC projects, including the Hubs project. She's also chair of the Lancaster Institute of Contemporary Arts. We asked Rachel to consider the provocation design is the method, so that's what she's going to do, hopefully, and explore design as a way of thinking about the topics we've been talking about this morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Rachel Cooper. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. The mic's on, I'm presuming? Yes. It's a pleasure to be here. I like coming on to music, but I didn't have far enough to go to dance, so that was fine. First of all, I have got lots of colleagues in the audience who know more about this subject than I do, really. But Andrew Chitty sent me an email that said, please don't assume everyone in the audience will understand even the basics of your field. So here we go. Design 101. Just to give you a short story, in 2006, I was given £3 million to do what I wanted with by a wonderful university called Lancaster University. When they offered me a job, I said, what the hell can I do on a hill in the middle of nowhere? And they said, well, what would you do with £3 million? And I said, I would rethink we do design research, and I would imagine, because that's what designers do. So I created Imagination Lancaster with 7 colleagues I recruited. We could call it multi, inter, cross, anything you like, disciplinary design. But there's not just designers in it. There are psychologists and sociologists and computer scientists. And we've grown over those 12 years from 7 people to 35-ish, and anywhere between 50 and 70 PhD students at any one time. And it was what I call top-down. So we started with research, we started with PhDs, and then we went down and developed undergraduate programs. My reasoning for doing this was because design is the method. I've always believed, since the time I started being a designer in the 1970s, that design is the place in which all these things come together. Design is the method. I can stop there now because Alex has described it all this morning to you, so I don't think we need to go much further. However, I've got 15 minutes, so I will. Design is the method. It drives innovation and creativity. And it involves making the modern world. Design research, in effect, crosses all disciplines and all challenges. And having worked in the industry for over 40 years, I am convinced design is the method. And it's the way in which we can drive industry, the future of industry, and in particular, the future of the creative industries. And so, why? Because design is a way of thinking and making. Now, thinking. There's been a lot of hype in the last 10, 15 years about design thinking. Management gurus, business schools, small consultancies have sold the notion of design thinking. It's always irritated me. It's not to say that designers don't think, of course they do, but actually the design method involves thinking and making. And making is intrinsic to the design method. Now, why? There have been hundreds of attempts to define the process of design. And it's been going on for over 40 years. And you have all sorts of descriptions. It always often tends to be linear. One of the most common one used is the double diamond. And it illustrates the notion that designers are trained in, and that is divergent and convergent thinking. Now, as a designer and then an academic, I've always been amazed that other academics in other disciplines, I won't name any, but maybe sociology, rarely think in a convergent way. They actually do a lot of divergent stuff. They diagnose, they identify, and they describe, but then they rarely use divergent thinking to develop solutions or materials or answers or show the world what could be. Design does that. So designers, why does design do that? Designers, and I think, again, Alex has said it all, but designers are trained to look in multiple directions. In order to create a product, a building, a message, a designer must interrogate technologies and materials, and they must understand the users, the contexts, they must understand what's happened in the past, and they use that and synthesize it in their imagination to create knowledge and create new futures. That is why Alex said designers go beyond silos. They do that. And what I did at Lancaster was actually offer that up so that across the whole university, being a small university, we could work across the silos of departments. And we undertook an enormous amount of EPSRC, ESRC and AHRC and EU-funded research projects around design in areas such as climate change, urban living, health and well-being, community engagement, anything that brought together scientists and social scientists across the university and across other universities. So we actually convene disciplines. We convene individuals and communities, and we bring them together with materials and technology. But we also challenge, and I think again, Alex explained, he always asks what if and why not. Designers are trained to challenge the status quo. They ask, why do we need it? What's it for? What's the alternative? We push the boundaries beyond the problem that's given to us. As a design consultant, I always challenge the client, and probably that was why I wasn't all that successful, because you can't always push the client beyond their safety environment and beyond their known idea of what they're going to produce. But actually designers visualize. That is, they think, but they also visualize. They make the intangible tangible. They use visualization and prototyping via any media, and they work with others to make those futures. And I'm going to actually introduce some colleagues who work with me to describe how they do that. So here we go. I've got to go onto the laptop now because it won't do it without me pressing a button. Is that going to happen? So this is a project that we're doing at the moment.
The Internet of Things is really anything that's connected to the internet, from a printer to your mouse to your car to parts of your house and so on.
All technologies essentially change society, and as the medium becomes the internet, then we're seeing changes in societal practice. We're interested in thinking about what these changes are so that we're better prepared to deal with them.
Petrus is the UK's academic research hub for the Internet of Things. It looks at privacy, ethics, trust, security, and one of these themes is adoption and acceptability.
In order to look at adoption and acceptability, we're using design fiction as a means to think about the future.
Design fiction involves constructing fictional worlds, and those worlds are defined by prototypical technologies, and they're populated by people that use those technologies.
There's been the so-called human-centered design for many years, which has been particularly good at creating products that are really useful for people. The problem when we connect that device to the internet is that often by making it very simple and easy, we mask potential problems, particularly around security and privacy, because they're assuming that the person doesn't need to know what else is going on, only what the function is. Centerless design is a notion that we've coined to try and describe a change in the way that we need to think about designing Internet of Things products.
To represent centerless design, we use this metaphor of constellations. We're not designing for one point of view, not the point of view of the customer, or indeed the corporation, or the point of view of the device. Together, these things form a constellation. They're still individual stars, they're still individual things on the internet, but when they're viewed together, they become a whole new thing.
Follow the Kettle is a way of us illustrating, particularly to developers of Internet of Things products, how this notion of centerless design might be applied in practice. But it also is useful for the general public to understand the potential of what the Internet of Things could be if done in a more open and transparent way. So we've created this fictional world in which Polly exists. It was funded by Kickstarter, and you can have this product in your home, but it also not only does the things you might expect of a smart kettle, it can recognize what coffee you're going to drink, but also how often it connects to the internet, who it talks to, how much data it sends, how much data it receives.
So using things like Polly the Kettle, we really get people to see the texture of these issues, to see inside them, and to be able to meaningfully think through what these kind of products mean for them.
It's been really useful working with government organisations to get them to think of these are the potential futures, but what do we need to introduce to ensure that it's delivered in a way that is beneficial to society? What the work's also pointing towards is whether we need things like an IoT mark, a kind of certification process that people know how much data it's transmitting, where it's being transmitted to, before you even make the purchase. It also raises questions about the notion of ownership. If this product needs to be updated with software and firmware and even replaced in the future, do we really need to own that product anymore, or should we go back to old rental models?
The promise of the Internet of Things is a better, more efficient, more sustainable world.
So this brings me to a point in that video that design is all about user-centered design. That's one of the brief was given me, and my provocation is that nowadays design is not just about the user. Design must go beyond the view of the world as user-centered. Design must start to understand the complex ecosystems in which we live, where we move between the material and the digital world, and using theories such as object-orientated ontology is where design researchers must start to look to see how we can continue to do research in this space and in other spaces. Giving you another example of that sort of way in which we work as design researchers is work we've done with Nottingham University, Databox, the BBC and FACT to look at the living room of the future. We actually installed a living room of the future in the V&A and enabled the public to actually try to understand what was happening to their data and to think about the ethics and the privacy and the security issues of the living room of the future. So designers are big-brained people. They are open-minded explorers, they challenge, they synthesize, they make in the real world. They look in every direction and they work with science, social science and the humanities to synthesize knowledge and deliver futures. The question is, are they always going to be responsible to be delivering the futures we want? And that's where we have to start to think about the ethics of designers and creatives and what they're actually creating. Coming back to the process is no longer linear. And I think Alex illustrated this. The process is a continuous process. As design researchers and designers, we discover, we define, we develop, we have insights, we move back to discovering, developing, and defining. And so my provocation to the brief I was given, which was Design is the overarching method for R&D in the creative industries. Design is user-centered. I would say design is beyond the user, and design is future solutions focused, and it also now moves between the digital and physical world, and that's why we need to use the design method. Thank you.